The night started with a warning that sounded more like a threat. "Hey, you two. I think it's best if you leave before things get messy." Officer Brett Coleman's slurred words cut through the country music humming inside Danny's Tavern, a dim, smoky bar where off-duty cops usually drank away their weeks. The place wasn't welcoming to outsiders, and certainly not to the two black men sitting quietly at a corner table. Daniel and David Thompson, identical twins in their mid-30s, had just cracked open their beers when the officers surrounded them. The twins looked relaxed, calm even, too calm for men being cornered by three armed cops. Brett leaned on their table, his smirk full of arrogance. "This isn't the kind of place for people like you," he said, his tone dripping with contempt. "We don't want any trouble." Daniel didn't flinch. "We're just having a drink," he replied evenly, his eyes still fixed on the bottle in his hand. That composure, too steady, too certain, made Officer Rick Torres hesitate for a split second. But Brett didn't notice. The third officer, Jake Morrison, younger and half-drunk, let out a sharp laugh. "You don't get it, do you? This is our bar, our turf. And we don't like suspicious folks hanging around." Across the room, a few customers shifted uncomfortably. Most looked away. They'd seen this kind of scene before, three off-duty cops flexing power where it wasn't needed. It was the kind of injustice polite people preferred not to witness. Daniel exchanged a quick glance with David, just half a second, silent but full of understanding. They had lived through moments like this before. When they were 15, they were stopped on their way home from school, accused of stealing their own backpacks. They had learned then when to bow their heads and when to stand tall. Tonight, they weren't scared. They were studying. Assessing. Daniel took mental notes, the way Brett's stance left his right side exposed, the nervous twitch near Rick's holster, Jake's unstable footing and the smell of alcohol on his breath. Meanwhile, David quietly mapped the room, 3 cameras, 1 exit, the bartender Louise watching nervously from behind the counter. "Look," Daniel finally said, voice steady as stone, "we don't want a problem. We'll finish our drinks and go. But the thing about arrogance is that it never listens when warned." Brett slammed his hand on the table, making the bottles rattle. "No. You'll leave now, and you'll thank me for letting you walk out." His tone made it clear he wasn't offering a choice. The sound of that slap pulled Daniel back to an old memory, a teenager, hands raised, trying to explain he hadn't done anything wrong. The burn of humiliation had never left him. But he wasn't that boy anymore. Neither was his brother. David reached slowly for his wallet. "Mind showing us your IDs?" he asked softly. "Just to make sure you're really police officers." The color rose to Brett's face. "You calling me a liar?" Rick placed a hand on Brett's shoulder. "Man, let it go. They said they're leaving." Rick couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The twins' calm wasn't defiance, it was the kind of confidence that came from experience. Dangerous experience. But Jake, too drunk to notice, kept pushing. "You think you can come in here acting like you belong? We own this town." "This town," Daniel echoed, his voice suddenly sharper. "Interesting thing to say." Brett shoved Daniel's shoulder. "Get up. Now." The music faded to a whisper. Louise, behind the counter, quietly picked up her phone. The twins rose together, their movements fluid, almost synchronized, 2 mirror images of quiet power. Their plain shirts couldn't hide their athletic builds. "We're leaving," Daniel said evenly. "But you'll regret how you handled this." Brett laughed, a short, ugly sound. Yeah. We'll see who regrets it when I search you outside. I'm sure I'll find something worth arresting you for. You have no idea who you're talking to, David replied. It wasn't a threat, just cold truth. Jake sneered. I don't care if you're kings of Africa. Here, you're nothing. They thought they were talking to two ordinary men. They were dead wrong. The brothers headed toward the door. Brett and his partners followed. Rick's pulse quickened, something about the twins' stride made his instincts scream. They weren't walking away in fear. They were controlling the situation. Outside, the parking lot glowed faintly under flickering streetlights. The night was heavy, quiet. Brett pushed Daniel hard against a parked car, metal cold against his back. You know what's wrong with people like you, he snarled. You think you're our equals. Jake circled David, waving his baton like a toy. Bet you've got drugs, huh? Always do. Rick hesitated again, eyes darting between the twins and his friends. Every part of his training told him to stop this, but peer pressure, and whiskey, kept him frozen. Daniel stayed still against the car. His eyes, however, were moving, measuring distances, angles, timing. He wasn't seeing a parking lot. He was seeing a tactical field. Fallujah, 2011. Captain Daniel Thompson crouched behind rubble, 3 insurgents ahead. 3 seconds to decide, 3 seconds between life and death. Brett smacked him across the head. I'm talking to you. Be careful what you say, David murmured. His voice was soft, but every syllable carried steel. Some words can't be taken back. Jake shoved him. Or what? You gonna sue me? Call the cops. He laughed. We are the cops, genius. Brett dug through Daniel's pockets, throwing his wallet and phone on the ground. Nice phone. Expensive for someone who probably stole it. Give that back, Daniel said, his tone commanding, not angry, but firm. A tone used to being obeyed. Brett heard the authority in it and snapped. Or what? Some men mistake composure for weakness. That's usually the last mistake they make. David watched silently. His mind flicked back to Norfolk Naval Base, 2018. He stood before his SEAL unit, 20 of the world's deadliest soldiers. Discipline, he had told them, is knowing when to act, and when to wait. Now, standing under the buzzing lights of the parking lot, he was waiting. You realize how many laws you've already broken? David asked calmly. Harassment. Assault. Illegal search without cause. Brett barked a laugh. The street lawyer thinks he's funny. Rick stepped forward. Brett, seriously. That's enough. Let them go. Brett shoved him away. Since when are you soft, Torres? These two need to learn respect. Inside the bar, Louise was filming everything through the window. He'd seen this trio torment people before, but something about tonight felt different. The twins weren't scared, they were waiting. Jake poked David in the chest. You came here looking for trouble, didn't you? People like you always do. Daniel met his brother's eyes. That half-second glance again, their unspoken code. Years of training, combat coordination, an entire language made of silence. Brett pulled out his handcuffs. You know what? We're taking you in. Suspicious behavior. Resisting authority. Daniel turned to face him fully. We haven't resisted, yet. The word dropped like a warning. When calm men start saying, yet, it's already too late. Jake's drunken grin faltered. You don't know how things work here, he said, slurring. This is our city. Your city. David repeated softly. Or were you about to use another word? Jake's face turned red. You're a problem that needs dealing with. Brett snapped the cuffs open. Hands behind your back. No, Daniel said simply. Silence spread like a shockwave. Brett blinked, confused. What did you say? I said no. We haven't done anything wrong, and if you touch me again, you'll regret it. Rick's instincts kicked in. Brett, stop. Something's wrong. But Brett's pride drowned reason. No, they're learning tonight. He raised his radio. Calling backup. We'll do this by the book. Daniel laughed quietly. You don't even know what by the book means. Jake lunged toward David, but the commander shifted lightly, making Jake stumble forward into empty air. The move was so quick, so precise, it looked accidental, except Rick saw it. And he knew. Only trained operatives moved like that. Brett, he said urgently, stop this now. Shut up, Torres. Brett barked. The bar lights clicked off. Louise was closing for the night. The silence of the parking lot felt heavy, like something about to break. Daniel checked his watch, a tactical Illuminox Navy model. You have 1 minute to apologize and walk away, he said evenly. Brett laughed in his face. Or what? David's expression hardened. Or you'll find out what happens when corrupt cops harass high-ranking military officers. For a second, Brett didn't understand. Then the word sank in. Military officers. But before he could ask, Jake made the worst decision of his life. He drew his baton and charged. And that's the moment everything changed. Jake Morrison swung the baton with drunken rage, his boots scraping across the asphalt. The metal rod cut through the air, but it never made contact. David moved with barely visible precision, stepping aside just enough for Jake's momentum to betray him. The officer stumbled forward, cursing under his breath. It wasn't luck. It was training, years of elite conditioning that turned reactions into reflexes. Before Brett or Rick could blink, Daniel had his phone out, camera pointed directly at them. Unprovoked assault by armed police officer, he narrated, voice calm as a reporter. Attempted attack with a deadly weapon against unarmed civilians. Turn that thing off. Brett roared, lunging forward, but Daniel was already 2 steps back, maintaining distance like a professional soldier. His tone, his posture, everything about him radiated control. The line between authority and arrogance had just been crossed, and this time, it was all on camera. David took out his own phone, recording from a different angle. Now it's 2 officers committing assault and trying to destroy evidence, he said quietly. You sure you want to keep going? Rick froze where he stood, his instincts now screaming louder than his loyalty. He recognized it, the silence, the stance, the coordination. These weren't random men. They were trained. Highly trained. Brett, Rick said under his breath, stop this. These guys aren't who you think. Brett ignored him. Pride burned too hot. Good, he spat. Let's make this official. They're resisting. He reached for his radio again, but his trembling fingers betrayed his anger. Across the lot, the bar owner, Louise, slipped outside through the back door. His phone was recording too. I already called the county sheriff, he said loudly enough for everyone to hear. And I sent your little performance to 3 local reporters. Brett turned, furious. You're done, Louise. Your bar's getting shut down by tomorrow. It won't, said a calm, unfamiliar voice from behind the parked cars. The words were sharp, cutting through the night. Everyone turned. From the shadows emerged a black woman in a charcoal gray suit, heels clicking on the pavement. Her presence commanded attention. Because I'm Assistant District Attorney Lisa Monroe, she said, flipping open her badge, and I just witnessed 3 police officers commit at least 7 crimes in under 10 minutes. Sometimes, justice arrives quietly. Sometimes, it steps out of the dark with a badge. Brett's expression collapsed. Wait, what? Lisa approached slowly, eyes locked on Brett. Harassment. Attempted assault. Abuse of authority. Intimidation. Drunken misconduct. Illegal search without a warrant. Need me to continue? She ticked the charges off one by one, each like a hammer blow. Jake pointed frantically at the twins. They started it. They provoked us in the bar. Lisa's eyebrow lifted. That's interesting, considering the videos I've already received show you 3 initiating the confrontation. Would you like to add lying to a prosecutor to your list? David slid his phone into his pocket and folded his arms, a hint of a smile forming. Prosecutor Monroe, he said calmly, long time no see. Recognition flickered in Lisa's eyes. Commander Thompson, she replied. Then she turned to Daniel. And Captain Thompson, I presume. The parking lot fell into total silence. The reality of what just unfolded hit everyone like a shockwave. Rick closed his eyes, whispering, "Oh, no." Brett's mouth went dry. Wait, what did you just say? Daniel took a step forward, his tone shifting from patient civilian to commanding officer. Captain Daniel Thompson, United States Army. Ranger Battalion. Currently an instructor at West Point. David followed, his posture just as firm. Commander David Thompson, Navy SEALs, Team 6. 3 tours in the Middle East. Currently on leave. And just like that, the hunters realized they were the prey. Brett stumbled back, trying to process it all. You can't be serious. Oh, we're serious, Daniel replied evenly. And you've just assaulted 2 decorated military officers on camera. Lisa crossed her arms. You've also given me all the evidence I need for a full-blown investigation. Rick slowly raised his hands. Look, this got out of hand. We can all just. No, Lisa cut in. Her voice was steady but sharp. 3 armed officers harassed and attacked unarmed citizens, who happened to be military heroes. That doesn't just go away. Jake's face turned pale. We didn't know. If we'd known they were military. David's head tilted slightly. So if we weren't military, this would have been fine. The silence that followed was heavier than any accusation. Lisa's tone turned colder. That's exactly the problem, Officer Morrison. Excuses crumble fast when the truth has receipts. Brett tried to recover his authority. You have no proof. It's 3 officers' word against theirs. Daniel smiled faintly. Prosecutor, how many videos do you have so far? Lisa tapped her tablet. 4 separate angles. The bar footage, both their phones, and mine. Oh, David added, lifting his wrist. And our watches. They record video and audio. Standard security measure when we're off base. Brett's shoulders slumped as if the weight of every mistake he'd ever made suddenly landed on him. Lisa wasn't done. We also have 3 witnesses inside the bar ready to testify. And Danny's tavern has working security cameras. She looked straight at Brett. You've been caught from every possible angle. Rick sank onto the curb, burying his face in his hands. He knew what this meant: career over, pension gone, reputation destroyed. Brett's voice cracked. What do you want? Money? Apologies? Daniel's eyes narrowed. We want justice. Not for us, for everyone you've done this to. Lisa nodded slowly. And I'd bet my badge this isn't the first time. How many, Brett? How many people did you harass? How many bogus arrests? Jake was trembling, tears streaking his face. My family, my career's over. You should have thought about that, David said coldly, before you decided a uniform made you untouchable. Consequences don't care who wears the badge. They care about what you do with it. The wail of sirens echoed from down the street. A sheriff's car pulled up, lights flashing red and blue across the parking lot. 2 deputies stepped out, one of them a veteran who had never been fond of Brett's boys' club. Prosecutor Monroe, the deputy greeted. We got your call. These the suspects? They are, Lisa confirmed. 3 counts of harassment, assault, abuse of authority, and conduct unbecoming officers. Rick stood without resistance. Yeah, he muttered. We deserve it. Brett, however, was still clinging to denial. You can't do this. I'm a cop. Lisa's gaze was ice. You were. As they cuffed Brett, Jake, and Rick, the irony didn't go unnoticed. The same clinking metal they'd used to humiliate others now locked around their own wrists. Brett looked at Daniel one last time. How did you do this? You set us up. Daniel met his gaze with quiet composure. No. You set yourself up. We just made sure it was documented. The truth doesn't need a plan. It just needs proof. Louise stepped forward cautiously. Thank you, he said, voice low but full of emotion. They've been doing this for years. Nobody ever stood up to them. How many? David asked. Dozens. Maybe hundreds. Always the same kind of victims, anyone who didn't fit their idea of right. Daniel exhaled slowly. What began as harassment had just exposed something bigger, a pattern of corruption that ran deeper than anyone imagined. Lisa pocketed her tablet. You 2 are free to go. I'll need formal statements tomorrow. She paused, then added, anything else you want to tell me about these 3? The brothers exchanged that familiar silent look again. Maybe, Daniel said finally. But first, we need to make a few calls. Just then, Brett's phone buzzed inside the squad car. Then Rick's. Then Jake's. Notifications erupted one after another. What's happening? Brett muttered, unlocking his screen. His face went pale. The video had gone viral. Hashtag corrupt cops exposed, 2.3 million views in under 3 hours. Every second of the bar altercation, every insult, every shove, every face visible in crystal clarity. Their names and badge numbers were trending across the country. Jake stared at the screen in horror. Oh my God. Lisa glanced at her tablet. 17 victims have already come forward, she said. Same officers, same tactics. This isn't an isolated case, it's a scandal. Brett slumped in the back seat of the patrol car. "We can fix this." The deputy turned sharply. "Shut up. You three are suspended without pay pending federal investigation." He looked at Brett coldly. "And your arrest record?" "Being reviewed from the last 8 years." What they thought was a routine night out had become a career-ending catastrophe. Rick's phone buzzed again. His wife. She'd seen the video. Her text was short and final, "We're done." His knees buckled. Meanwhile, Daniel and David stood beside Lisa, watching the chaos unfold with quiet restraint. "Captain Thompson," the deputy said, "the Pentagon just called. They want reports filed. Military prosecutions considering follow-up for any officer who's interfered with active service members." Brett gagged, vomiting onto the floor of the squad car. By morning, national news networks were already running the footage. By noon, the mayor called for a full department review. By evening, the 3 disgraced officers faced 23 criminal charges combined. Louise reopened the bar that same night. The line stretched down the street. Everyone wanted to visit the place where corruption finally met its reckoning. Injustice had ruled that bar for years. But tonight, justice ordered the last round. As Daniel and David watched the coverage from their hotel, Daniel said quietly, 18 calls from the Pentagon. They want us to train police divisions in ethics and protocol. David nodded, scrolling through the news. And look, victims are coming forward. Justice might be late, but it's finally real. Morning sunlight spilled across the quiet streets, but the town wasn't quiet anymore. Every radio station, every TV channel, and every local feed was talking about one story: the viral footage from Danny's Tavern. 3 police officers, drunk and off-duty, caught on camera harassing 2 black men who turned out to be high-ranking military officers. By breakfast, the clip had hit national headlines. By noon, major networks were debating police culture, racial profiling, and accountability. Brett Coleman's name was everywhere, not as a respected officer, but as a national disgrace. At the precinct, chaos reigned. Phones rang non-stop. The chief's voice boomed from behind closed doors, barking at staff to prepare statements. The mayor's office demanded updates every hour. For the first time, the small department that once acted like it owned the town was on its knees. Power feels invincible, until the world finally looks back. Brett sat in an interrogation room, eyes hollow, uniform stripped of its badge. Across from him, Lisa Monroe flipped through a thick file. Her calm presence only made the silence heavier. "Officer Coleman," she began, "your record is being audited. We've already found inconsistencies in 7 arrests. All involving minorities." Brett rubbed his temples, sweat dripping down his face. "You don't understand. We were just..." Lisa cut him off sharply. "No. You don't understand. This isn't about one bad night. This is about a pattern, one that ends today." He slumped back, defeated. The arrogance that had once fueled him was gone, replaced by fear. Across the hall, Rick Torres sat quietly, staring at his hands. He wasn't angry, just broken. He'd known it was wrong for years, but he'd gone along anyway. Now, everything was gone: his wife, his job, his pride. Jake Morrison wasn't much better. His hangover had turned into panic. He'd spent the entire morning crying, repeating, "I didn't mean it," like a prayer that couldn't save him. Regret always shows up, but only after the cameras stop rolling. Meanwhile, Daniel and David Thompson arrived at the county courthouse. They were calm, composed, dressed in plain clothes. Yet as they walked through the building, officers and civilians alike turned to look. Whispers followed them, part respect, part disbelief. Lisa greeted them at her office door with a handshake. "Gentlemen," she said, smiling slightly, "seems you've become the face of accountability overnight." Daniel shrugged. "Not by choice. We didn't come here for headlines." David nodded. "We came here because justice shouldn't depend on status." Lisa gestured for them to sit. "I agree. But because of that video, people are finally paying attention. We have 17 official complaints filed against those 3 officers, and counting. The department's under federal investigation. The FBI is watching." Daniel folded his hands, his military calm unshakable. "Then let's make sure this leads to something real. A single moment of courage can echo louder than a lifetime of silence." Outside, reporters swarmed the courthouse steps. Some held microphones, others cameras. The Thompson brothers walked out side by side, saying nothing. Their silence spoke volumes. By that evening, talk shows were dissecting every frame of the footage. Experts debated what it meant for race, justice, and respect. Clips of Daniel and David went viral again, not the confrontation this time, but their poise under pressure. Americans saw 2 men who had faced death in war zones, standing tall against arrogance at home. In one TV segment, a veteran choked up on air. "Those men served with honor," he said. "They showed restraint most couldn't. They didn't fight back, they exposed the truth." The internet can destroy reputations, but sometimes, it restores dignity. Back at the station, things were unraveling fast. The police chief resigned within 48 hours. 2 other officers, mentioned in the viral comments, were suspended. The mayor called an emergency press conference, promising sweeping reforms and full cooperation with federal authorities. The town, once known for quiet corruption, was now the epicenter of national outrage, and unexpected change. Meanwhile, Brett sat in a holding cell, his hands trembling. He'd been questioned by internal affairs, federal agents, and now faced multiple charges: harassment, assault, abuse of power. But the worst part wasn't legal. It was the silence from the people he once called friends. No one stood up for him. No one defended him online. His phone, returned temporarily for evidence review, buzzed with message after message, angry texts, death threats, even old colleagues distancing themselves. He dropped it on the cot and stared at the floor. Rick, 2 cells away, muttered, "We should have just walked away." Brett didn't respond. For once, he had nothing to say. When pride falls, it doesn't make noise. It makes silence. Across town, Louise stood behind the bar at Danny's Tavern. But the energy was different now. The place was packed, not with arrogant cops, but with locals who came to celebrate courage. On one wall, a framed newspaper headline read, "Twins expose corruption, viral video sparks reform." Louise poured a drink for an older man at the counter, who smiled. "You were smart to record that night." Louise shook his head. "I was just tired of pretending not to see. Those 2 brothers, they gave me the courage to finally do the right thing." Change doesn't start with heroes. It starts with witnesses who refuse to stay silent. Later that night, Daniel and David sat on the hotel balcony, watching the news replay clips of their confrontation. The glow of the screen reflected on their faces. "You ever think we'd end up teaching lessons to cops?" David said with a faint smile. Daniel chuckled softly. "I'd rather be teaching recruits at West Point." But maybe this was needed. David leaned back. The Pentagon called again. They want us both to help design training programs, ethics, de-escalation, racial sensitivity. Across multiple states. Daniel nodded slowly. Then maybe something good will come out of all this. They sat in silence for a moment, listening to the faint hum of the city below. The night breeze carried a strange mix of relief and sorrow. Justice had come, but at a cost. Even victories born from pain carry the weight of the fight that caused them. The next morning, Lisa called. "You two might want to see this," she said, her voice brisk but satisfied. At the courthouse, she handed them a printed report. 17 officers under review. 8 already dismissed. 43 cases reopened. And get this, 8 victims exonerated and financially compensated. David scanned the document, then looked up. "You're really doing it. You're cleaning house." Lisa smiled, the kind of smile that comes from quiet triumph. "We all are. You gave me the proof. I'm just following through." Daniel offered a nod of respect. "Then keep going. Don't let them bury it once the cameras stop." "They won't," she said. "Not this time. Justice isn't a moment. It's a movement." That night, Brett watched the news from the holding cell. The headline read, "Department Overhaul Begins. 17 officers fired." A photo of the Thompson brothers appeared beside Lisa Monroe. The caption read, "The Faces of Change." He muted the TV. His reflection stared back from the dark screen, a man who had once felt untouchable, now forgotten. His arrogance had built the walls around him, and now those same walls were closing in. Rick sat quietly beside him, whispering, "We did this to ourselves." Brett said nothing. But deep down, he knew. The same system that protects injustice can also punish it, when the truth is undeniable. By the end of the week, the brothers' story had become more than a viral video. Schools discussed it. Churches preached about it. News anchors called it the turning point. Lisa Monroe, now leading the state special task force on police integrity, gave an interview. "Justice," she said, "isn't revenge. It's responsibility." Daniel and David watched from afar. For the first time in a long while, they felt peace. Not celebration, just quiet, steady peace. 6 months later, the town looked different. The same streets that once turned their heads away from injustice now held murals of unity and slogans about reform. Danny's Tavern had been renovated, its once dim lighting replaced with warm gold tones. A new sign above the door read, "Where justice was served." Inside, the chatter was lighter. Laughter filled the room that used to echo with tension. Luis, now part owner of 2 more bars, poured drinks with quiet pride. On one wall hung a photo of Daniel and David Thompson shaking hands with prosecutor Lisa Monroe, the caption beneath it simple, "Dignity has no rank." Time doesn't erase history, but sometimes, it redeems it. Meanwhile, 3 former officers lived lives that no longer resembled the power they once abused. Brett Coleman woke before dawn every day to serve coffee at a roadside diner. His uniform now was a brown apron, his badge replaced by a name tag. The first few weeks had been brutal. Customers recognized him, some sneering, some filming, others just whispering. He learned to keep his head down, to listen instead of command. Every cup he poured was a reminder of what arrogance had cost him: a house, a pension, and a name once said with authority now met with disgust. When pride falls, it doesn't just break, it shatters, piece by piece, with every ordinary moment. Jake Morrison wasn't doing much better. He worked at a call center, selling insurance over the phone. Every time he had to say his full name, his voice shook. Too many people had seen his face. He lived alone now, divorced, his son refusing to speak to him. Sometimes, during lunch breaks, he'd scroll through the old video, torturing himself with the moment everything changed. Rick Torres worked nights as a security guard at a supermarket. The man who once carried a badge now carried a flashlight. He avoided mirrors and small talk. His wife had left. His friends had vanished. Yet, unlike the others, Rick felt something the rest didn't: acceptance. He knew he'd been weak. He'd watched wrong and said nothing. His punishment wasn't unfair. It was overdue. Silence can protect you in the moment, but it condemns you in the end. The town's police department, once rotten with unchecked power, had been stripped and rebuilt. 17 officers were dismissed. 43 cases were reopened. 8 innocent people were cleared and compensated. There were new faces, new training, and for the first time, open discussions about racism, ethics, and responsibility. At the center of that transformation stood Major Daniel Thompson. His lectures on ethics and discipline now reached 6 states. Police recruits who once rolled their eyes at sensitivity training now leaned forward, taking notes. Daniel didn't preach, he told stories. Real ones. About power abused and respect earned. Respect, he told one class, isn't demanded with a badge or a title. It's earned through restraint, through fairness, through knowing you have power and choosing not to misuse it. Some lessons don't need classrooms. They need scars. David, meanwhile, was stationed in Washington, D.C., working directly with the Pentagon on civilian-military relations. His face appeared on the cover of Time magazine under the headline, "The Commander Who Changed the Conversation." He didn't chase fame, but it found him anyway. Schools, conferences, and veterans groups wanted to hear from the man who stayed calm while being targeted. When asked how he managed such restraint, David's answer never changed. Discipline isn't about strength. It's about control, especially when you have every reason to lose it. Lisa Monroe's career soared too. Her unwavering stand during that night turned into a wave of public trust. 6 months later, she ran for chief district attorney, and won with 73% of the vote, becoming the first black woman ever to hold that office in the county. Justice doesn't need applause. It needs proof, and courage to follow through. One morning, Daniel stood outside the new police academy after delivering a lecture. The crisp wind carried a quiet satisfaction. He opened his phone and saw a news headline, "Corrupt Officer Sentenced, Local Department Fully Reformed." He scrolled further and saw something else, a clip of Brett Coleman. A journalist had found him at the diner, working behind the counter. The camera showed Brett pouring coffee, shoulders slumped, eyes tired but sober. When asked if he had anything to say about the incident, Brett paused, then said quietly, "I thought power made me respected. Turns out, respect comes from how you treat people, especially the ones who can't fight back." Daniel watched the clip twice. He didn't smile, but something softened in his expression. Redemption doesn't erase guilt. It proves that lessons can still be learned. That same afternoon, Luis hosted an event at the bar. It was the anniversary of "The Night That Changed Everything." Locals gathered to celebrate progress and reflect on how far they'd come. Lisa arrived in a tailored navy suit, greeted by applause. Daniel and David followed, drawing a quiet wave of admiration from the crowd. Luis raised a glass to standing up, he said. To recording when others look away. And to proving that silence makes you part of the problem. The bar erupted in cheers. Cameras flashed, reporters asked questions, but the brothers stayed humble. After the crowd thinned out, Lisa approached the twins by the counter. "It's strange, isn't it?" she said. "How one night can rewrite everything." Daniel nodded. It wasn't just one night. It was years of people letting things slide until someone finally didn't. David leaned in slightly. Change doesn't happen because of who we are. It happens because someone chooses not to run anymore. Lisa smiled. And you two chose perfectly. Every movement begins with one person saying, "Enough." Later, Daniel walked outside for air. The cool evening breeze brushed against his face. Across the street, Brett's diner glowed in the distance, the sign flickering faintly. Through the window, he saw the former officer wiping tables. For a brief second, their eyes met, two men connected by a night that changed both their lives. Brett looked away first, ashamed. Daniel simply nodded and walked on. There was no anger left. Only understanding. Inside the diner, Brett exhaled heavily, replaying the moment in his mind. The man he'd once shoved and insulted now looked at him without hate. That, somehow, hurt more than any punishment the court could give. Forgiveness doesn't always sound like "I forgive you." Sometimes, it's silence that refuses to hate back. A week later, Lisa Monroe stood on the courthouse steps, giving a press conference about the results of her reforms. The Thompson brothers watched from the crowd. "Justice," she said, "isn't about destroying your enemies. It's about rebuilding the system that let them exist." The applause was thunderous. Reporters shouted questions, but she smiled and stepped aside, gesturing toward the brothers. Daniel approached the microphone briefly. "Hate doesn't define who we are," he said, his voice firm and measured. "It defines who we choose not to be." The crowd went silent, then erupted in cheers. It wasn't just a line. It was truth, lived, not spoken. The strongest statements aren't shouted. They're lived out loud. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the courthouse, Daniel and David stood quietly beside Lisa, watching the people disperse. For the first time, the town felt lighter, as if justice had finally taken root. "Think they'll remember this?" Lisa asked softly. "They will," David replied. "Because the world watched. And the truth never unlearns itself." Daniel placed a hand on her shoulder. "You did good, Lisa." "So did you," she said. "So did you both." 3 years later, the world had moved on, but the story never truly faded. What began as a viral video in a small-town parking lot had become a case study in law schools, police academies, and leadership seminars across the country. The Thompson brothers' story wasn't just a trending moment, it had become a mirror for a nation learning to confront its own reflection. Daniel Thompson now taught full-time at West Point. His lectures filled every seat, his voice steady and clear. The younger cadets looked up to him not just because of his rank, but because of his calm authority, the kind that came from experience rather than ego. He opened one lecture with words that had since become his signature. "Courage isn't always running into danger. Sometimes it's standing still when pride wants you to strike back. True strength isn't measured by reaction, but by restraint." Meanwhile, David traveled across the country, giving talks on ethics and equality in law enforcement. His name had become synonymous with integrity, not because he was flawless, but because he'd faced injustice without losing his dignity. At one university event, a young black cadet stood during the Q&A and asked, "Sir, were you ever scared that night?" David smiled softly. "Fear is natural," he said. "But fear doesn't control you unless you let it. The moment you remember who you are, and what you stand for, fear loses its voice." The crowd erupted in applause. Even silence can roar when your actions speak louder than words. Back in their hometown, the changes still echoed. The police department that once operated in shadows now stood as a model of reform. Transparency programs were in place, citizen boards held officers accountable, and for the first time in decades, community trust had returned. The mayor, once criticized for silence, had turned over a new leaf, publicly thanking the Thompsons and Lisa Monroe for their courage. He even helped open a new community center named the Justice Bridge Initiative, offering mentorship and education programs for at-risk youth. Luis, the bar owner, ran it. He had traded late-night shifts for morning workshops, teaching young people about leadership, integrity, and self-worth. The old man who once watched injustice from behind a counter now stood at the front of a classroom, reminding every student that change starts with witnesses who refuse to stay quiet. When one person speaks up, 1,000 others find their voices. Lisa Monroe had become a respected force beyond the county. Her work with the Thompson brothers led to statewide reform, and her speeches began attracting national attention. She wasn't a politician, she was a truth-teller. Her slogan was simple: justice must outlive outrage. In one televised interview, she was asked what kept her motivated. She paused, then said, "Because every time I think of that night, I remember the look on those men's faces, calm, steady, and unbroken. They didn't fight with fists, they fought with proof. And that's what justice should look like." Her words went viral, again. Justice spoken with conviction becomes a message that never dies. As for Brett Coleman, life had humbled him into something almost unrecognizable. After completing his sentence for misconduct and assault, he stayed at the diner. He didn't drink anymore. Didn't yell. Didn't hide. He just worked, quietly, honestly. One rainy afternoon, Daniel walked into that same diner. The bell over the door chimed, and Brett froze behind the counter. Their eyes met, not as enemies, not as rivals, but as men who had lived through two sides of the same truth. Brett cleared his throat. "Coffee?" Daniel nodded. "Black." Brett poured the cup and set it down, hands slightly trembling. "I don't know if it means anything now," he said, voice low, "but I'm sorry. For everything." Daniel studied him for a long moment. Then he said, "It means something." He reached into his pocket, pulled out a small card, and slid it across the counter. "There's a program opening next month, community policing reform training. They could use someone who knows both sides." Brett looked up, stunned. "You trust me to do that?" Daniel shrugged. "No one knows the damage better than those who caused it. Fixing things starts there. Sometimes the path to redemption begins with an unexpected hand reaching back." Brett stared at the card long after Daniel left. It was the first time in years he'd felt like someone believed he could be more than his mistakes. He whispered to himself, "Maybe this is my second chance." That night, David called his brother. "You did it again," he teased. "You just can't stop recruiting the fallen, can you?" Daniel chuckled softly. "If people could change war zones, they can change themselves. Forgiveness isn't weakness. It's rebuilding something stronger than what was broken." Months later, the Justice Bridge Initiative hosted its first national conference. Officers, educators, veterans, and community leaders filled the auditorium. Lisa Monroe opened the event with her signature confidence, but the highlight came when she introduced Daniel and David as keynote speakers. The lights dimmed, the audience quieted, and the brothers walked on stage to a standing ovation. Daniel took the microphone first. "We were never meant to be heroes," he said. "We just refused to be victims." David followed, his tone softer. "And to anyone watching, remember this: the uniform doesn't define your honor. Your actions do. Uniforms fade. Integrity doesn't." After the speech, Lisa joined them on stage. Together, the three stood before a banner that read, "Justice is not a moment, it's a habit." Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions. But for once, the noise didn't matter. What mattered was that people were finally listening, not just to the scandal, but to the solution. Outside the venue, a teenager approached Daniel shyly. "Sir," she said, "my brother used to hate cops. After seeing your story, he wants to join the force, to be one of the good ones." Daniel smiled gently. "Then that means we did something right. Change isn't measured by how loud it starts, but by how far it travels." The years rolled on. The viral video that once exposed injustice had turned into a documentary, an educational film, and even a symbol of reform movements nationwide. Schools studied it. Activists referenced it. And every time, the same message echoed: respect, accountability, and humanity must never be optional. On the anniversary of that night, Daniel, David, and Lisa met again at Danny's Tavern, now transformed into a memorial cafe dedicated to truth and courage. Photos lined the walls, showing protests, victories, and smiling faces of those who once suffered in silence. Luis greeted them with hugs. "Hard to believe, huh? One night started all this." Daniel looked around at the families laughing, children playing near the jukebox, and nodded. "Maybe it didn't start here," he said. "Maybe it started the first time someone stayed quiet, and ended the night we refused to." Lisa raised her glass. "To justice, and to the people brave enough to make it real." David added, "And to never letting fear have the last word." They clinked glasses, the moment quiet yet powerful. Some battles are fought once. Others echo forever, as reminders of who we can become when we choose what's right. As the night wound down, Daniel stepped outside, looking up at the stars. The same sky that had watched that violent, chaotic night now felt peaceful. No flashing lights, no shouting, just stillness. He whispered softly, "Mom would have been proud." David joined him, following his gaze upward. "She would have," he said. "Because we didn't just survive that night. We changed it." Daniel nodded slowly. "Yeah. And maybe, somewhere, someone else is recording right now, standing up when they're not supposed to. And because of what happened here, they won't feel alone." Legacy isn't about being remembered. It's about inspiring someone else to act. As they walked away from the bar, the old sign flickered one last time in the night breeze, where justice was served. The brothers smiled quietly. Justice had been served, yes, but more importantly, it had been rebuilt. If this story moved you, share it. Talk about it. Because stories like this aren't just entertainment, they're reminders that silence protects no one, and courage, no matter how small, can transform everything. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories about truth, justice, and the strength that comes from doing what's right, even when it's hard. Because justice isn't just a word. It's a choice we make every single day.